At this point, being a Mets fan is just a groundhog day of misery.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. From brake parts to exhaust kits and beyond, eBay Motors has over 122 million parts to keep your ride or die alive. For all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to bring home that big win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. Another gut-wrenching, brutal day for the New York Mets. What else is there to say? This team is just not very good, and they wasted a brilliant start by Tylor Megill, arguably, probably not even arguably, the best start of Tylor Megill's career. He looked unbelievable in the first game of this doubleheader on Tuesday. He carved through a really good Dodgers lineup. I know they haven't been swinging it the best as of late. They are very top-heavy, but I'll tell you what, if Tylor Megill can go through the gauntlet that is Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, and Freddie Freeman, time after time after time, without getting banged up, without giving up runs, that says something. And it was really impressive to see him mix so many different pitches. He's got 7 pitches now, which is insane. I know I've talked about this before, so I don't want to beat a dead horse on it, but this is a guy that came up with only a fastball, really. Yes, he was working on a slider and a changeup when he was a rookie, but it was a guy that got by in the minor leagues strictly based on great extension and a solid fastball because a big guy gets down that mound well and threw really hard. Well, now all of a sudden, he has just created this whole toolkit. And it's not that he is relying on 7 different pitches throughout the start where he's going to each one consistently. It's still a fastball 53% of the time. He's then working in a slider and a cutter, at least today, most frequently. But then he'll throw a ghost fork and surprise the guy. He'll throw a changeup. He's got a curveball. He's got a sweeper. So many different pitches that he can go to just keep hitters off balance. I talked about this in spring training, how Tylor Megill needed to differentiate himself to be able to keep guys off of his fastball, that he was always going to be predicated on his fastball, but at times in the past, when there wasn't another good pitch he can go to, batters could eliminate some things and really focus in on the fastball and do damage against it. The guy that we saw today, that looks like a pitcher that can actually be a really good starting pitcher for the Mets for years to come. It's one start, you got to sustain it. But I think if there are some silver linings we can take from a horrible season up to this point, is we have seen some definite progression when it comes to the Mets starting pitching depth long term. When you see Tylor Megill throwing the ball this way, with what we've seen from Jose Buda, who in AAA just won the Player of the Week in the International League because he had 2 great starts. So he's still throwing the ball well, and I'm sure we'll see him at some point this season as a rotation spot will eventually get opened up. And then to see Christian Scott in the big leagues, not to mention some of the prospects coming along, I feel good about the future of the Mets rotation. And honestly, the rotation is the furthest thing from the problem right now. The problem is the bullpen, which has gone from an anchor of this team to a complete turnstile of misery. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just whoever you put out there, doesn't matter, they're going to blow it. And then you have a defense now that I don't know if it's because they're playing tight, if they know how bad it's been and they just can't grab momentum and they can't feel at ease. But the way the Mets lost this game, it was just horrific because Tylor Megill gives you everything. Francisco Lindor hits a 2-run homer early in the game, and you're clinging to that all the way through. You think, all right, the Mets are going to have to try to win this game 2-0. They're not getting anything else. And granted, they were going up against the Cy Young candidate in Tyler Glasnow, who really didn't make any mistakes other than the Lindor home run pitch. So it was sort of justifiable in the first game to see the offense struggle the way they did. But the fact that the Mets could not come through and how it all happened, it's just par for the course. 8th inning, bullpen comes in. It's Reed Garrett. He looks a lot more pedestrian lately, gives up a base hit. But then from that point on, he got a couple ground balls. First one, ground ball to Jeff McNeil. He makes the side shovel toss to Lindor. Lindor catches it, but whether he couldn't field it cleanly off of the transfer, or whether he couldn't pull the ball out of his glove cleanly on the transfer, or if it was just that Pages was running down the line too well, no attempt was made to throw out Pages at first, and that was a blown opportunity. The Mets could have had 2 outs and really escaped, but instead the inning prolongs. You get another ground ball. This one, Brett Beatty makes an error, and all of a sudden you have 2 runners on. Garrett comes out of the game for Jake Diekman, and it's Ohtani and Freeman coming up, which could be a disastrous, set of hitters to face at any point in the game. But even with that, the Mets sort of got through it. Diekman got a ground ball from Ohtani that could have been a double play ball, but that one, not really the fault of Lindor who fielded it. Ohtani just moves so damn fast down the line that he just beat that out. But then that, continued the inning, and all of a sudden, Freddie Freeman gets an opportunity. I'm sorry that I mentioned it. Next time the Mets play the Dodgers, or I guess any team, maybe I won't speak it into existence where I talk about these guys who are struggling and how they've been Mets killers in the past, and this is an opportunity for them to get right, because Freddie Freeman, he got right. he got really right in that game. He punches a hit to score a run. So now it's 2-1. Diekman gets Will Smith to strike out, so he holds on to the lead. The Mets do nothing, of course, in the bottom of the 8th. Then Adam Ottavino comes on for the save. Immediately gives up 2 singles. Then Chris Taylor, who's been a disaster this year for the Dodgers, lays down a safety squeeze bunt with runners at first and third. Adam Ottavino tries to make a play. It was a tough play. They rule a hit because it really was tough. He was trying to field a short hop on the bunt and make a play home on the runner. Couldn't get the job done. By the time he fielded it, there was really no play at first base. And he was lucky to even get out of that inning without further damage, because there was no outs, couple runners on, gets a big strikeout, then he gets a double play ball, and it's actually turned. So the Mets are sitting there still, though, with a great opportunity to win a baseball game against the Los Angeles Dodgers. It's 2-2, bottom 9. You just have to scratch a run. And then Pete Alonso leads off the inning with the base hit. Brandon Nimmo strikes out, but then JD Martinez, first pitch hitting, he gets a base hit. You have 2 runners on. Harrison Bader, great at bat. He draws a walk. Bases juiced for Tyrone Taylor. They pinch run Starling Marte for Alonso. So that gives you speed at third base. You just have to hit a fly ball to the outfield, and the Mets can walk off a second consecutive game and maybe find that momentum that Jeff McNeil said after the doubleheader where they got swept, that the Mets had absolutely none of it. They had an opportunity to grasp it. But Tyrone Taylor had a horrible at bat, and I say it's horrible because he started 3-0. Obviously, you have to take all the way there, of course, because I was praying for the walk-off walk. Didn't happen. But then you're sitting 3-1. You got to be a hitter in the box. It felt a la Francisco Lindor a couple days ago, where a guy just puts the bat on his shoulder and is begging to get walked instead of trying to take some aggression, some initiative, and do it himself. He gets a fastball that was the perfect pitch to hit. Got so much plate. It was just exactly what you wanted. You should have been sitting dead red on the fastball, waiting to drive it. And if you do that, the Mets win that game. Instead, keeps the bat on his shoulder. Now you don't know what's going to come because it's a full count. It could be a slider. It could be a fastball. It was a fastball, but he pops it up. Doesn't get it anywhere near far enough. Mookie Betts catches it. I think the infield fly rule was even called, even though that pitch or that pop-up did end up on the outfield grass. And then at that point, you have Jeff McNeil come up, and he pops out. But the Taylor at bat in particular was brutal. Not that McNeil popping out was any better, but just awful. And then Jorge Lopez comes on, and you know what's going to happen in extras. First batter he faces is Mookie Betts, and sure enough, gives up a base hit. They have a lead. Then after striking out Ohtani, Freddie Freeman hits a 2-run homer, and that's insurmountable for this Mets team in the bottom half. They go down in order 1, 2, 3. And that now makes it 3-7 this year, the Mets are, in extra inning games. And they have only scored in the 10th inning with the ghost runner, mind you, twice all year. That's brutal. How can you not get that runner across? I get the game was over. If they had just gotten that one run across, it wouldn't have mattered. But that ineptitude is just frustrating. And then you talk about the blown saves. They've blown 5 of their last 7, 8 of their last 14. 8 of their last 14 save opportunities. The New York Mets have blown the game. If they had just simply converted 5 of those, if they had been 11 of 14 in save opportunities, which is probably about an average rate if you have a good bullpen, you would have been looking at this Mets team right now, instead of being 10 games under, they'd be 500. That's the difference. How many of these games they keep on blowing? They're playing a lot of close games and they're losing them all. Disha Thasser, Mets beat writer for Fox, I believe now, she tweeted this out after the game that the Mets are the only team in the majors to allow more than 5 runs per game and score less than 4 runs per game since April 21st. They are 10-23 during that time, the worst record in baseball. This team's been awful. And the second game of the doubleheader, I'll spare you the details. The Mets lost. Jose Quintana, quality start, gave up 3 runs, one in the first, one in the second, and it felt like the game was over right there. Solo homer in the 6th. The Mets offense just, they did nothing. They were still probably just in a shell after blowing that first game, and they just could not hit. 3 hits, 1 walk, just lifeless effort. There you go. You get swept in a doubleheader and you lose another series. So now they'll try to salvage something against the Dodgers in the final game of the series with David Peterson on the mound Wednesday, late afternoon. But it's looking like potentially another sweep here, and the Mets just continue to fall further and further below 500. But most of the biggest news from the day came from David Stearns meeting with the media prior to the game. So I want to talk about what we learned from that press conference in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience are what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available for U.S. customers. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates anytime some news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. We can communicate back and forth. You get these starting 9 graphics sent to your phone each day. You also can take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. So if you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. David Stearns met with the media prior to the doubleheader on Tuesday, and he got grilled by the media, as you'd expect. Why is your team horrible? Will Pete Alonso get traded? Why not? Are you going to sell everything that isn't tied down? Obviously, the questions weren't that blatantly obvious as far as what the reporters are trying to get, but they were looking for any scrap from David Stearns, and he pretty much gave them nothing, which is what you want from the executive, quite honestly. I think he answers all the questions thoughtfully, and he does provide some insight, but he's not going to throw his team under the bus. You know, he's buttoned up in that way. So when it came to if the Mets still have a chance at the playoffs, he basically said like they could have a run in them, that they haven't lined up things throughout the year, which we've heard him talk about before, being able to line up the pitching, the hitting, the bullpen, the defense, all of it. It just hasn't happened, but he still believes in the players in that clubhouse, which is, again, what you have to say. But when really sort of asked about when or if the Mets would contemplate selling, he was, again, very, precise in his answer, and it doesn't deviate from what we've heard in the past. He's not going to be overreactionary and trade Luis Severino tomorrow just because the Mets are sitting in this position where they're 10 games under. Yes, it's looking very unlikely that they're going to be able to be in position to be buyers at the deadline. But as David Stearns says, the baseball calendar provides the roadmap for that. you're not going to make many trades at the end of May or early June. Those trades, for the most part, are going to happen at the end of July. And he was also asked about the deadline strategy that he might put together. Like, when do those conversations happen? He said throughout July. So throughout July, there's preliminary conversations. I'm sure teams are calling saying, Sevy available? Is Sean Manaea available? Oh, maybe what type of pieces are you looking for? They start throwing some names around or whatever it ends up being. But there's some preliminary discussions where teams are just expressing interest in players. The Mets are maybe expressing some interest in different farm systems that might want to work a deal out from. So those things will be happening behind the scenes. And honestly, like to a certain extent, they happen now in the sense that scouting is taking place every single day across minor league baseball. Not only do you have to know your own system inside and out, but you want to know everybody else's too. And so the Mets are already going through that process. And I still believe long-term, beyond this season, with this guy atop the organization, they are going to be able to get to a point where it's his people that have been in place for a while. They're scouting their development, and eventually this organization is going to be on a much more solid footing than coming into what is this, year 4 of just trying to build through free agency. We had a great article that went up from Clay Snowden at justbaseball.com today, looking at long-term contracts in free agency and if there's any value there. And surprisingly enough, for hitters, even less value than pitchers, but those deals rarely hit. So to build through free agency is always going to be a crapshoot. And the Mets are now in this position 4 years in to the Steve Cohen era with dead money on the books and a team that's just sort of tied down to what they've tried to do in the last couple of years, trying to win quick. And it was a year where the Mets, if everything broke right, could contend. And like David Stearns said, they still can, but they're going to let this thing play out. And then naturally, the Mets probably will be aggressive at the deadline. So right now, as the title of the episode says, David Stearns is preaching patience on all fronts. But once they get to a point where this team, if they don't snap out of this and prove that there is something here, then they're going to have no decision but to sell. And I think for the clubhouse last year, having the rug ripped out from under them was a little bit more shocking and drastic because you had the equity built up from a 101 win season and you played pretty good baseball in July that month, where you at least could have thought about a team having a run in them. Now, after what happened last year, that's the lack of equity that's built up. And now you're doing it again when you can't win baseball games. At a certain point, something's going to have to change. I thought it was interesting when he talked about Pete Alonso, or actually not even when he talked about it. Andy Martino did some follow-up reporting about the Pete Alonso situation. David Stearns basically just said, we're just trying to help Pete be the best version of himself, yada, yada, yada. But there was a story from Andy Martino on SNY. And what he basically talks about is how the front office is considering all possibilities, even the one where they trade Pete Alonso and still can re-sign him in free agency. But essentially that if this team is nowhere near the wild card mix when you get to the deadline, they're going to explore a deal. Now, the question is the same one I've been asking on this show for a while, is if there's going to be a package that's worth it to pull the trigger on. Is there something that is drastically better than the value you would get for a compensation pick with the qualifying offer? And that's where I don't know what's going to be available to the Mets. And I do have my doubts as to if that big trade is on the table where you get 2 top 100 guys for Pete Alonso. But it's all wait and see mode on those fronts. Now, in the injury situations, Kodai Senga, no time frame on his return, although he was throwing in the outfield today for whatever that's worth. We'll see how that second quarter, is it a second cortisone shot for him? Or he just get his first one? He might have just got his, no, he got an injection, right? He got an injection in his shoulder, I think, early in this process, right? So he got another injection, and now maybe it's feeling better that he's throwing, but it's still potentially a long way away before we see Senga. The guy who just got a second cortisone shot in his wrist is Jet Williams. They're saying now that could require surgery, that injury that happened, I guess, after spring training. The Mets' top prospect could be in for a lost season. Hopefully, that cortisone shot heals up the pain that he's had in that wrist, it can get back on the field because it would just be horrible for a lost season for Jet Williams. But this injury has really extended for a long time. When asked about Mark Vientos and Brett Beatty, he said they both deserve to be in the big leagues, but you can't have the roster at this present state in perpetuity. And there's been some rumblings that maybe a change is going to be made after having to have Lindor and McNeil play both ends of a doubleheader, play all 18 innings, or actually all 19 innings. So we'll see. We'll see if a move is made. I still believe that it would have to be Beatty, not Mark Vientos, the way that Vientos has swung the bat. But you just never know what's going to happen. So we'll see what the Mets decide to do. There's also an alternative course of action where maybe you don't feel like you're getting that much value from Tyrone Taylor and you DFA him, or maybe you feel like you can option DJ Stewart. I just think Stewart holds more value on this roster than Taylor does or than Beatty would in this scenario. And just to get rid of an outfielder to bring up a utility infielder that isn't going to play much, especially if you have both Beatty and Vientos on the big league roster at the same time, I imagine it's one of those two that gets optioned. And again, I still think it's Beatty, but we'll see if that happens this week. The final note, which is what we're going to talk about more in the next segment from today's news from Stearns and also Carlos Mendoza, is that Francisco Alvarez will begin a rehab assignment on Thursday, which is fantastic. Hopefully he can save the Mets season, or at least just save us from the constant frustration, maybe give us some decent baseball, change the energy, because man, does this team need it. We'll talk about where Alvarez is at in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. So winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And again, it's only a $5 money line bet. Throw $5 on the Dodgers. The Mets aren't going to win, are they? And you get to hedge your happiness a little bit. Either you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, or the Mets won a game. So maybe that's the way to play it. You also have the Rangers right now in the playoffs. So if you want to bet on any of your playoff hockey, you can do so from FanDuel. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The Minnesota Timberwolves extended the Western Conference Finals to a 5th game by winning on Tuesday night. For all the latest on that series and everything else going on in both the NBA and NHL playoffs, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Francisco Alvarez could be coming back in short order. He will begin a rehab assignment in Binghamton on Thursday. Now, what does that mean? The plan, according to Carlos Mendoza, is that Alvarez will catch 5 to 7 innings, and then the team will go from there, building him up because he's got to catch back-to-backs. And then once that is proven and the swing looks good, you could bring him back and he could be part of this team. Honestly, as crazy as it is, I could see it happening as soon as next week. Now, how exactly does that actually work out? Well, there's going to be 4 games that he can play in at Binghamton, right? So you got Thursday, which he will be starting that game, and see how he fares. If he's feeling great, having no issues, like right now, he's catching velocity off velo machines, and he's taking batting practice, and he's face velocity. So the wrist is good enough outside of a game situation that he's able to now go play a game for 7 innings, and that means that he's close. And so if he goes out in that game and he's 2 for 3, and he catches all 7 innings and he comes out of it feeling great and wakes up the next day, no soreness, I imagine they'd probably still give him a day off, but then he goes out there on Saturday, catches 7 innings, another 3 at-bats, hits a home run, all right? Sunday, they may be playing back-to-backs, and at that point, if that works out well, who knows? Maybe he joins the Mets in D.C. I strongly doubt it, but I'm just putting it out there that at this stage of the game, with him being able to do everything, basically, it's just a matter of how he responds to catching a live game, which is going to be more strain on him than anything he's faced up to this point. If he handles that well and he's good to go, and he's an eager kid that is chomping at the bits to get back, I think the Mets could sort of rush him through this, and it's not a rush when it comes to re-injury. I don't think they're definitely not going to be careless with this, but if there is nothing to be concerned about on a health side of things, when it comes to just getting his timing back with his swing, I think the Mets would be very quick to want him back because he just provides you with a better defensive option than the two guys you have and a much bigger threat offensively, even if it takes him some time to shake off the rust. If I had to guess, I imagine he's going to start after the London series. I think that they're going to let him play out this week on rehab, then have one more week, whether that's with Binghamton or Syracuse, while the Mets go out to London to face the Phillies. And then when they come home, that's when I'd imagine that he's actually going to get out there and get back in the lineup. But what does that mean? It means at this stage, I think the Mets might only have 10 more games left to play without Francisco Alvarez. One more against the Dodgers, 4 games set against the Diamondbacks, 3 games against the Nationals, and then a 2-gamer in London against the Phillies. You never know, though. Maybe they want him there in London, want to take him on that trip. Maybe he wants to go with the team. And if he's already got 4 games under his belt at that point in rehab assignments, maybe you could justify activating him for that trip. But we'll see. The thing about Francisco Alvarez and where the Mets are at, if they are still in this position they're at now or a little bit better, Alvarez could be a spark plug. They were good with Alvarez this year. They were 11-8, and then they've just been awful since. Do the math there. 22 and 32. So that makes them 11-24 without him, right? Brutal. I want to point out, though, that in 2022, the Baltimore Orioles were 16-24 going into May 21st when Adley Rutschman made his debut. And they did lose that game. But from that point on, after his first game with the Orioles, they went 67-54 to close out the year. That's 13 games over 500. They were 63-50 in games that Adley Rutschman played. And they finished the year at 83-79. A really good young catcher can mean a lot to your team. It just changes all of the energy. So if there is one guy that could put on the Superman cape and drag this team out of just disgusting baseball and horrible vibes, I think it's that dude with his infectious smile and his just bulldog mentality. I can't wait to see Francisco Alvarez back for the Mets. I think that's the one consolation prize we have this season is getting to see Alvarez and Vientos and Petey to a certain extent. And maybe Luis Angel Acuna comes up, had a big game tonight, 2 for 4 with a homer. He's starting to swing it. Seeing the young guys make their way up and see them actually get the chance to play every day on a lot of these occasions here with Alvarez and probably Vientos soon. That's what I'm hanging on to each night. It's getting to see the development of those guys because that's going to play a big role in 25, 26, and beyond. Now, the road ahead of the Mets. We've already sort of broached it, but let's just nail it down. I think they're about to hit a stretch here, including this game against the Dodgers before they head off to London, that could honestly end their season. And we've said things like that before. But if they lose again against the Dodgers and don't avoid getting swept, and then lose that series at home against the Diamondbacks, or even worse, get swept there in a 4-gamer, at that point, you're sitting 15 games under 500, and then you got to go into Washington if you lose there. I mean, if this team is 17 games under when Alvarez comes back, what chance do you possibly give them? Now, on the other side of the coin, if they can avoid getting swept by the Dodgers, if they can beat the Diamondbacks in a series and beat the Nationals, then all of a sudden they're going to have some positive momentum. You go out to London, maybe some crazy stuff happens, across the pond, and you win a game or 2 there. And then you come home and Alvarez rejoins the team. And there could be hope that this ragtag group actually has another push in them where they can get back to somewhat of relevance in the standings. I'm not counting on it, but at least Alvarez, for a moment, can give fans a slight glimmer of hope. I don't know if you can fix that bullpen, though. That is going to continue to be an issue. But we'll see what they do against the Dodgers on Wednesday. I'll be breaking down that game and more on tomorrow's edition of Locked On Mets. Appreciate all of you who tuned into the show today. If you're listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Trying to make a push to 9,000 subs. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. After your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel covering everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today, which is available again 24/7 on YouTube and also on Amazon Fire TV.